In West Texas, you can buy 20 acres of land for $15,000. That's not a glitch in the Zillow algorithm. That's not a foreclosure auction buried in some county courthouse. That is the actual asking price on dozens of active listings right now. Raw desert ranch land in a state where people are supposedly fleeing to escape high costs everywhere else. The catch isn't the price. The catch is everything underneath it. 10 towns, each one abandoned or nearly gone. Each one surrounded by land that sells for what most people spend on a used pickup, and each one with a reason that price makes complete sense once you know the history. Silver mines, railroad routes, mercury deposits, Route 66 diners. These places had entire economies built around them, and then those economies evaporated. What got left behind is the land itself, cheap and quiet, sitting in counties where the annual property tax bill might run lower than a single month of streaming subscriptions. We're going to cover all 10, what drove the boom, what caused the collapse, exactly what land costs today, and the specific catches that don't appear anywhere in the listing. By the end, you'll have a complete picture of what affordable West Texas ranch land actually means, and whether any of it makes sense for someone planning a real life out there, not just a line on a balance sheet. Here are 10 abandoned Texas towns where you can buy ranch land for less than a used car. Sierra Blanca. Sierra Blanca is where the affordable West Texas land story usually starts, and it's not hard to see why. 20-acre parcels in the surrounding area list for around $15,000. 40-acre tracts go for $20,000. Annual property taxes run between $80 and $95. To put that in perspective, 20 acres of land anywhere near a functioning American city runs $150,000 or more. Here, the same acreage costs a tenth of that in a state with no income tax, with property tax bills that arrive looking like a rounding error. The town sits at the old junction of the Southern Pacific and Texas and Pacific railways. When those lines converged here in the 1880s, Sierra Blanca had a purpose. Goods moved through, cattle shipped out, people stopped. Then logistics modernized, the trains stopped being the point, and the town followed them into irrelevance. Today, it functions more as a county seat in name than in practice. The median home value across the county sits at around $30,000, less than a tenth of the national median. That number isn't a data glitch. It's the market's verdict on what a railroad junction becomes once the railroad stops caring about it. The land surrounding it is controlled by large holding companies that subdivided former working ranches into thousands of those 20 and 40 acre increments. Developments like Sunset Ranches run marketing campaigns specifically designed to reach out-of-state buyers online. The pitch is engineered around the lowest possible friction. No money down, $135 a month, no requirement to visit. Buyers who show up in person tend to ask questions. Here's what the listing doesn't say. In much of this area, drilling a well to reach viable groundwater costs more than the land itself. The aquifer depth at many of these subdivided parcels makes a private water supply prohibitively expensive. Roads to the properties are often unmaintained dirt tracks that wash out in the rare but intense desert rains. The county has no infrastructure obligation once the land is sold. Connectivity has improved. Starlink now covers the area at nearly complete availability, but satellite internet at over $120 per month adds a recurring cost that no listing factors into its comparison to used car prices. For a buyer who understands what they're getting, a speculative landhold, a tax-efficient asset, something to leave in an estate, it may be exactly what it claims. But the gap between owning 40 acres and sustaining a life on 40 acres is wider here than any listing will tell you. TERLINGUA. TERLINGUA had its economy built on a poison, cinnabar, the ore used to produce mercury. Starting in 1903, the Chisos Mining Company extracted quicksilver here under industrialist Howard Perry. At its peak, the town supported 2,000 residents. Then the mine went bankrupt, the ore ran out, and TERLINGUA became a ghost town. Ruins, desert, wind. What happened next separates TERLINGUA from the rest of this list. The ruins attracted an off-grid culture. Big Bend National Park sits close enough that the area developed an identity, something most abandoned West Texas towns never managed. So TERLINGUA today is semi-abandoned, part ghost town, part destination. The real estate here involves TERLINGUA Ranch, a 200,000-acre development once owned by Carroll Shelby. After his involvement, the land was subdivided and parcels sold off. Those parcels are now governed by an entity called the Property Owners Association of TERLINGUA Ranch, or POATRI, which collects mandatory annual maintenance fees. The fees fund road maintenance across the ranch, roughly 1.5 hours of road work per account. In 2026, that fee is $229.90. That number sounds manageable until you miss it. POATRI's enforcement mechanism adds attorney fees ranging from $3,500 to $4,500 to delinquent accounts. A debt that started as a few $100s in unpaid assessments can become a multi-thousand-dollar legal liability. The association has the authority to pursue foreclosure. The land is genuinely beautiful. The access to Big Bend is real. But the cheap ranch framing skips past the fact that POATRI isn't optional. The fees aren't symbolic, and the consequences of treating a $200 annual obligation as a minor detail are documented across the ranch's ownership history. Buy the land, pay the fee. Those are the terms, whether the listing mentions them or not. Shafter. Shafter had a run that most Texas towns never approached. Founded in 1882 after a significant silver discovery, it grew into the most productive silver district in the state. Over 35 million ounces extracted across its operating life. At its peak, 4,000 people lived here. A processing plant and refinery were built. Then the accessible ore was exhausted. The Presidio mine closed in the mid-20th century, and Shafter went quiet for decades. That quiet is ending. An Australian mining company called Black Bear Minerals has confirmed that all key operating and environmental permits for the Shafter Silver Project are in good standing. They're positioning for a restart and have described their exploration across the McDaniel Trend as aggressive. The company has identified a remaining resource estimate of 17.5 million ounces still in the ground. Silver's trajectory adds urgency. In January of 2026, silver traded at roughly $30.80 per ounce. By May of 2026, that same ounce was worth nearly $95. For a buyer who picked up surface land near Shafter before any of this happened, that context is a legal alert, not good news. Texas real estate law treats mineral rights as the dominant estate and surface rights as subordinate. A surface owner who doesn't also hold the mineral rights, and in a historical mining district like Shafter, that severance happened long ago, can be legally required to accommodate exploration and production activity on their land. Drill pads, access roads, industrial equipment. The accommodation doctrine gives surface owners some protection if alternatives exist for the mineral developer, but if no reasonable alternatives exist, the mineral interest prevails. In an area where an aggressive exploration program is actively expanding, the practical probability of that protection mattering to a small surface owner is limited. Cheap surface land in an active silver district with a well-capitalized mining company holding valid permits nearby is not passive land ownership. It's an industrial adjacency the buyer didn't know they were agreeing to. TOYAH. TOYAH is the story of a town that got bypassed. Not as a metaphor, but as a geographic fact. The oldest town site in Reeves County, founded as a trading post in 1879 and expanded by the arrival of the Texas and Pacific Railway 2 years later, TOYAH became a legitimate cattle shipping hub. Hotels, banks, churches. At its peak in 1914, the population reached over 1,000 residents. Then a new rail point called TOYAH Valley was established closer to the actual ranching operations. Cattle shippers no longer needed to route through TOYAH, and the commercial logic of the place evaporated with that rerouting. The population tracked the decline in a straight line across every subsequent decade. Over 500 in 1931, under 200 by 1970, 61 people by 2021. What's left sits inside the Permian Basin's oil country, and that is the catch for modern buyers. The Permian Basin doesn't look like a ranch. It looks like an oil field. Scrap metal, discarded tires, heavy equipment. These aren't distant features on the horizon. They're the immediate landscape surrounding the cheapest parcels near TOYAH. The proximity to Interstate 20 and the Missouri Pacific Rail line means the area has constant traffic and industrial movement, but none of the amenities that traffic would generate anywhere else. For industrial storage or low-cost residency tied to oil field employment, certain boxes get checked here. For a retiree picturing a quiet high desert retreat, the visual reality of what surrounds TOYAH is a specific mismatch with the way the listings read. The land is affordable precisely because the landscape has already been consumed by industrial use, and acreage doesn't create a buffer from that. ORLA. Orla has 2 residents, a gas station, a diner that reportedly opens at odd hours. The town started in 1890 as a section house for the Pecos Valley Railroad. In the 1960s, a surge in oil, gas, and sulfur activity pushed the population to 250. Then the activity relocated to more efficient extraction sites, and Orla was left with its position on Highway 285, 38 miles north of Pecos, surrounded by pipeline corridors and equipment yards feeding the broader Permian Basin operation. The only civic infrastructure that remains is a post office on 285, which tells you something about how the government classifies a place with 2 residents and no commercial economy to speak of. The land is inexpensive. The reason is visible from the road. Heavy truck traffic runs constantly on 285 servicing the oil fields. Gas flaring produces light pollution visible across miles of flat terrain at night. Decades of sulfur and petroleum activity that predate modern environmental standards have left the ground an open question regarding contamination. Potential soil contamination from petroleum and sulfur byproducts isn't a hypothetical here, it's the documented history of what was extracted and how it was handled in an era before those standards existed. Orla isn't a ghost town in the romantic tumbleweeds and ruins sense. It's an active industrial zone with almost no permanent residents. A buyer who conflates those two things tends to discover the distinction after the paperwork is signed. Mentone. Mentone is the county seat of Loving County, the least populous county in the United States. In 2021, the entire county had 64 residents. The town itself had 8. There is a courthouse because Texas law requires 1 for a county seat. The county was laid out in 1925 by oil prospectors, and oil has been the dominant economic reality ever since. What followed that discovery is a population arc that charts like a seismograph. 600 residents at the peak in 1933, around 150 by the 1940s, 50 by 1990, 8 in 2021. For a stretch of 12 years between 1972 and 1984, not a single business was open in the town. The courthouse functioned. That was it. The paradox is that Loving County is simultaneously one of the wealthiest counties in Texas on a per capita basis. 8 residents, significant oil output, no grocery store. The math isn't a mistake. It's the consequence of an economy that extracts enormous value from the landscape without requiring more than a handful of people to manage it. Surface land here is priced low because the part of the property that generates real value in Loving County, the mineral rights, isn't available to a casual buyer. The energy industry has held those interests for generations. What's for sale is the surface, priced to reflect that it sits on top of someone else's more valuable asset. Property taxes run among the lowest in the state, with annual bills that can fall under $100. That's the one legitimate financial advantage of surface ownership here. Everything else requires leaving the county. Healthcare, groceries, and basic services are located in neighboring counties, with Pecos representing the nearest genuine service hub at roughly 25 miles. The community here is built entirely around energy workers and county officials. It's not an unfriendly place. It's a place built for a purpose that isn't retirement. GLENRIO. GLENRIO was split in half by the Texas-New Mexico state line, and that division is the entire explanation for why it existed. Founded in 1909 as a land promotion, it grew because of Route 66 and because of what the state line made legally possible. Texas counties in the area ran dry. New Mexico did not, so the New Mexico side had bars. Texas had lower fuel taxes, so fuel sales concentrated on the Texas side. The town was essentially a regulatory arbitrage mechanism with a cafe attached, and it worked for as long as cars kept driving the mother road. Then Interstate 40 bypassed Route 66. Without through traffic, the arbitrage had no customers, and GLENRIO had no secondary economy. Around 10 residents remain today, split roughly between states. Land is cheap, the catch is specific to geography. The area sits within the Federal Border Enforcement Zone, a corridor where federal agents operate under broader interpretations of Fourth Amendment protections regarding search and seizure than would apply further from the international boundary. For a buyer who specifically values privacy and distance from government activity as part of the appeal of remote ranch land, the GLENRIO location is a meaningful disadvantage that won't appear in any listing. The regulatory arbitrage that built this town was clever while it lasted. The regulatory reality that replaced it is less convenient. LOBO. In 2023, the entire town of Lobo was listed for sale for $100,000. The inventory, 10 acres, a motel, a grocery store, a post office, a gas station, and a swimming pool. $226,000 below the Texas median home price at the time. That gap circulates online, and it's accurate. It's also the least important number attached to this transaction. The sellers were a group of German friends who had purchased the town and used it as a vacation and festival site for years. The reason they were selling, stated plainly, they were too old to continue maintaining it. That sentence is the complete analysis of what you're buying. Lobo has been abandoned since 1991. The structures are adobe and wood frame, materials that West Texas heat, temperature swings, and sustained wind erosion attack without pause. Without constant upkeep, these buildings don't deteriorate slowly, they collapse. The German owners managed that process through sustained effort and real money across many years. When the physical demands became unsustainable, they listed. They were transparent about why. The buyer of Lobo for $100,000 is acquiring a full-time restoration project in one of the most logistically isolated stretches of Culberson County. All labor and building materials must be imported from significant distances. There is no local contractor network. There is no nearby hardware store. Every repair requires planning and lead time that urban buyers rarely account for when they see a listing price that low. The sellers weren't leaving because the place lacks something worth preserving. They were leaving because preserving it is a full-time physical commitment, and they had done it as long as they could. Salt Flat. Salt Flat didn't collapse because of economics or a rerouted railroad. It collapsed because someone else's water pump was bigger. The town had real infrastructure at its height. A federal emergency airstrip built in 1932 operated 24 hours a day until the 1960s. Not a seasonal strip, a continuous operation. Bus route traffic from the El Paso to Carlsbad Caverns Highway moved through regularly. A post office stayed open until 2004. The population reached around 125 residents at its peak. This was not a speculation camp. It was a functioning small community with federal infrastructure built to support it. What ended it was the regional water table. Massive agricultural irrigation in the nearby Del City area pumped so aggressively from the shared aquifer that water levels dropped to the point where local wells began failing. The natural salt deposits that gave the town its name stopped forming because the water table that fed them was gone. A community that had warranted a federally maintained 24-hour airstrip couldn't sustain itself once the wells stopped producing. Texas operates under what's called the rule of capture for groundwater. A landowner can extract whatever water they can pump from beneath their property with no legal liability for the effect on neighboring wells. Del City agricultural operations consume over 23,000 acre-feet of water annually, legally, with no recourse available to smaller adjacent landowners. Texas is the only western state that still adheres strictly to this doctrine. Every other western state moved towards some form of proportional allocation. Texas did not, and small landowners near Salt Flat have been living with that decision ever since. For a buyer looking at cheap land near Salt Flat today, that history is an active condition, not a cautionary tale from the past. The agricultural pumping continues. The aquifer hasn't recovered. Many small landowners in the area already rely on water hauling, trucking in water from external sources on a recurring basis. That cost, paid indefinitely, is the real ongoing price of owning land here. Cornudas. Cornudas is where the West Texas land hustle becomes fully explicit. In 2005, a Florida-based developer named Jerry Wallace purchased the town, which consisted primarily of the Cornudas Cafe and surrounding land, and attempted to rename it Wallace Town, USA. The plan involves subdividing the area into 20-acre parcels and marketing them online to out-of-state buyers. No money down, low monthly payments, no requirement to visit before purchasing. The Cornudas area is where many of the Sunset Ranch's tracks are concentrated. The same marketing infrastructure that operates around Sierra Blanca extends here, targeting the same buyer profile. The parcels are frequently purchased by buyers who have never seen the land. Infrastructure at many of these parcels is virtually non-existent. No power lines, no water connections, no paved road access in most cases. Hudspeth County Judge Becky Walker has explicitly stated that the county lacks the legal authority to require developers to provide basic services, roads, water lines, power connections, to subdivided tracts. That isn't a gap pending future legislation. It is the structural condition within which these sales are designed to operate. The county cannot compel services, the developer has no obligation to provide them. The buyer has no legal claim on either, making the land habitable for a modern retiree, accounting for well drilling in an area with severe aquifer access problems, off-grid power installation, ongoing water hauling, and road preparation would cost a multiple of the land's purchase price. The transaction is legal. It is structured around what the county cannot require, what the listing omits, and what a buyer who hasn't visited is unlikely to investigate before signing. This is the logical endpoint of the West Texas land market. The price is real. The land is real. The gap between owning it and living on it is the entire story. Across 10 towns, one pattern holds. The price of the land is real. The history of the boom is real. The collapse is real. What isn't guaranteed, what the price doesn't include and no listing explains, is that surface ownership in West Texas automatically translates into livable land. Texas property law separates the surface estate from the mineral estate, and water rights can be severed from both independently. A buyer can legally own 40 acres and hold no rights to the water beneath them, no protection against an adjacent mining operation's surface activity, and no claim on any infrastructure a county cannot legally compel a developer to provide. The agricultural exemption that keeps property taxes under $100 a year can trigger a rollback assessment the moment a buyer converts the land from open range grazing to residential use, requiring payment of the difference between agricultural valuation and market valuation going back 3 to 5 years, plus interest. These aren't obscure edge cases. They are standard features of Texas rural property law that apply across every county on this list. What ties all 10 towns together more than anything else is what the research on this region calls the hydro illusion, the assumption that buying surface land in West Texas includes a reasonable path to water. It often doesn't. Whether the aquifer has been legally drained by adjacent agriculture, physically severed from the surface deed by a previous owner, or simply too deep to reach for less than the cost of the land itself, the water situation in each of these places is the single most important due diligence question a buyer can ask. And it's the question the listing is least likely to answer. The towns themselves are not frauds. Terlingua has genuine character earned by the people who stayed after the mercury economy collapsed. Shafter has a documented silver history that global commodity markets are currently pricing at nearly $100 per ounce. Glenrio has a Route 66 story worth understanding on its own terms. The land transactions are legal, the prices are accurate, and for a specific kind of buyer, a speculative landholder, a tax efficiency seeker, someone with real off-grid experience, and the capital to build functional infrastructure from scratch. Some of these places deliver exactly what they advertise, but the retirement-ready version of West Texas ranch life requires a second budget that nobody quotes alongside the listing, water infrastructure that may cost more than the land itself, satellite internet at over $120 per month, where fiber competition doesn't exist to drive prices down. Air evacuation insurance, a practical necessity for anyone living 85 miles from the nearest full-service hospital in a region where a cardiac event or a stroke puts the clock at 90 minutes before you reach an emergency room. Mandatory association fees with documented legal consequences for delinquency. The recurring cost of hauling water to parcels where the aquifer is unreachable or legally inaccessible. These costs don't make the land worthless. They make the total cost of ownership a different number than the listing suggests. The nearest hospital to Sierra BLANCA is 85 miles away in El Paso. The nearest full-service facility to Terlingua is 80 miles away in Alpine. Those distances don't eliminate the option of living in West Texas. They define what living there actually requires. The dirt is yours the moment you sign. Everything else, the water beneath it, the minerals under that, the road to reach it, the grid connection it may never have, is a separate negotiation with Texas property law, the high desert climate, and whatever industrial interest held the dominant estate long before you arrived.